Bluntly put, AI-generated imagery is not original, but derivative at best and theft at worst. A lot of the points made in favor of this being art are fundamentally derived from nonsense. The insinuation that there is artistic intention within an algorithm is not rooted in reality. The creative process and human artistic intention of the original works on which the technology was trained is eliminated or ignored, or worse, forgotten. Undefined space between original intent and accidental output drives me to argue that the artistic intentionality component of an AI-generated image is void. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Natalie. Thank you for being here. Today's topic of conversation I think is somewhat controversial, and I was interested enough to write a blog on it. So do forgive me. I'm not an expert on this topic of conversation, which is why I'll be doing a bunch of reading from my notes that are taken from my blog, which most probably will go published before this video is up. Before we get started, my opinions are subject to change based on new information. This is not an attempt to be confrontational, stubborn, or difficult. This is not a criticism of artificial intelligence or AI, nor is it a criticism of its application, at least not here in this video. Whether you are for or against the use of AI in our daily lives, one cannot deny that the technology is remarkable. A few months ago, I came across a cool video snippet. It was an AI-generated clip of a xenomorph neomorph that displayed its anatomy and form. I immediately assumed that the clip was AI generated, and I didn't like the product nor its concept any less. And looking into the work, it was described as AI generated artwork, and the use of the term artwork didn't annoy me as such, but it got me thinking about the topic of AI generated imagery in general. As part of my preparation for this article, I left a poll on my channel. The question was, is AI generated imagery art? And 2 responses were made available: yes it is, or no it isn't. And I didn't leave a middle ground because I wanted the partakers to make a choice. And at the time of saying this, at the time of speaking to the camera right now, the poll represents the majority of partakers voting that AI generated imagery is not art, with 80% versus 20%, with a sample size of 91 participants. Alright, so part 1, introduction. I was at a social engagement the first time that I'd heard about AI generated imagery. I spoke to a person who mentioned Midjourney and how they'd used it to produce a photo for their significant other. The outcome sounded cool, and I had no problem entertaining their admiration for the software. It was only towards the end of their description of the software and of their image when the person said to me, knowing well that I am a photographer, "You should give Midjourney a go." And I had a gut reaction to what they had said, and something felt off. The initial jerk reaction to what they just said to me was not positive, and I can imagine that might be how some of the painters initially reacted to the introduction of the camera a few hundred years ago. I'm assuming that they weren't overwhelmed with positivity. The camera could now capture a portrait or a landscape in a less time-consuming manner and with potentially less effort. Just to clarify, the camera obscura has existed in principle since around 400 or 500 BC, but it was embraced as a potential artistic tool in the 17th century. Fast forward a few centuries, and various subgenres of photography are now classified as art. However, not all photographic images are art, and a set of criteria need to be adhered to classify an image as art, unless you're subscribed to the Dadaist ethos, in which case doesn't matter. As an artist who is also a photographer, I am not particularly worried about AI and its potential effect on my existence as an artist. I just feel a bit odd about my current feelings towards art, what it is and what it isn't. And interestingly, researching for this blog that I wrote has unexpectedly resulted in me feeling less for my photography as an art form. Additionally, I am concerned over my degree of concern. I thought I didn't care, yet here we are. This essay was written from the perspective of a photographer that identifies as an artist and lays out my opinions on what art is and why I currently feel that AI-generated imagery does not fall into the category of art, and a fair amount of this essay will rely on semantics. Art, from the Oxford English Dictionary, the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as a painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. Based on the primary definition found in the Oxford Dictionary alone, one could close the case right there. Conversely, one could argue that the human typing the prompts into the AI software adds the human component, and I will address that point. But before I get ahead of myself, what is a prompt and what do we mean by an AI-generated image? I'd like to emphasize that I'm not an expert in this field. I did a lot of research to write the next couple of paragraphs, and I do sincerely apologize if I said anything wrong, inaccurate, or if I misrepresented something. Please do let me know in the comments kindly if something that I've said here is not appropriate. An artificial intelligence or AI-generated image is an image created by an AI model. Broadly speaking, an AI model is essentially a computer program that learns from data to generate an output, or in the case of an image generator, to generate a new image. These computer programs run sophisticated statistical queries based on large amounts of data on which they are trained. AI models can analyze data using a process called machine learning to identify trends and patterns without explicit human input, allowing the program to improve its performance over time. In the case of AI-generated imagery, the model can synthesize a new image based on a command set or a prompt that a human types in as text. With said prompts, the image generator synthesizes an image based on patterns that were identified during the model training. Generally speaking, these models are trained on large sets of images found online. These models are trained to identify color, dominating color palettes, texture, brush strokes, styles, shapes, and geometric patterns by processing images as numerical data. Instead of understanding an object, this is an apple for example, as a human would, the model mathematically analyzes common characteristics of an apple or of apple images and generates new variations based on learned patterns. Importantly, AI does not perceive or interpret images as humans do. While an AI model can generate photorealistic, painterly, or artistic outputs, the model lacks emotional or cultural awareness. It doesn't understand contextual and artistic intention. AI-generated images are the result of statistical pattern matching rather than intentional artistic expression. In the case of an AI image generator, what is essentially happening is the model generates a new image that mimics certain components within the images on which it was trained, and it will do so based on what prompts are typed in by the human user. For example, and please forgive this, painted portrait of an elderly woman with long hair sitting back in a large antique wooden chair with warm candlelight and a dark background. I have never prompted an AI image generator, so I don't know if this is a good prompt, and it's probably a bad one, but that wouldn't matter anyway, because if I didn't learn how to write a decent prompt, I could go online and buy prompts to generate portraits, for example, in the style of Rembrandt, and I kid you not. But once we set aside the phenomenal feats that this technology is breaking, once we segment the scientific technology from the real-world general use of the image generator, and once we recognize what proportion of the image generation is machine-generated versus the proportion that is human-made, one can acknowledge that the creative process has been, to a great extent, cut out. The creative process and human artistic intention of the original works on which the technology was trained is eliminated or ignored, or worse, forgotten. Sadly put, in order to write these programs, the creative process and intentional strategies that drove the original artworks on which these AI programs were trained, they're simply forgotten and not taken into account. And this brings me to my primary question: is AI-generated imagery really art? As much as I don't mind a grey area, my opinion is no. Can something produced by a non-human entity be considered art? Some insist that there are strong arguments on both sides, and I disagree. I don't really hold it against anyone for having an opinion that opposes mine on this matter, but at my core, I can't help but feel that the attempt to broaden the definition of art is inappropriate. AI lacks subjective experience. AI does not experience emotion. AI can generate imagery that is art-like, but not art by definition. Part 2. Exploring some of the arguments. AI art or AI-generated imagery? Arguments that AI-generated imagery is art. Point 1, or A. Let's say A. If the output evokes emotion, tells a story, or has aesthetic value, then it's art. Response? My response, no. If an output evokes emotion, it means that the output was displayed to a sentient being, most probably a human. If we entertain the idea that the main criteria required is a human reaction to classify a piece as art, then what of the art that never gets seen? The argument that art is primarily about the end product and not the creator presents a superficial stance at best. Many artists produce art with no intention of sharing it. If an image is dependent on an audience response or reaction to classify it as art, then what of the art that no other human other than the creator will observe? Is that human-made piece therefore not art? Or what of the art that evokes no emotion? I found myself to be at times indulgent to the notion that a painting is just a painting or a picture is just a picture. There's no emotion felt, no story perceived, no aesthetic value identified. I can acknowledge that my opinions reflect such apathy predominantly when I am at a low energy state and not receptive to feel the art nor its intention. However, even in an apathetic state, I can acknowledge artistic intention without feeling one iota of emotion. Is that human-made piece therefore not art? Point B, image generators are tools, and art can be defined by its impact on the audience alone and not by artistic intent. If an AI-generated image evokes emotion, sparks thought, or inspires creativity, one could consider it art, regardless of whether a human or an algorithm created it. Therefore, AI is just another tool. If an artist uses tools like a painter uses a brush, a photographer uses a camera, a digital artist uses software, AI is just another tool. My response, yes, AI is a tool, and part of this tool set comes the data that this tool analyzes. It is an algorithmic tool that gathers existing data from an imaging library from which it has been probably illegally, systematically, mathematically, and probably also stochastically trained. The AI model then identifies a pattern to generate an output of data that we can perceive as an image. If the concept of AI being a tool is invoked as a defense for its product being art, would it not make more sense for the data within the AI's algorithmic model be considered the tools, and the AI's algorithm itself being the generator or the creator of the image, therefore making the human the commissioner of the image? With this, even if one were to consider this to be art, it is not the prompter's artistic work, it is the prompter's commission, and this brings to mind the commissioned art analogy, which I will discuss. And as the AI is not human, it cannot be the artist. One should rather state that the AI model is the generator of the synthesized image. And with this, I can acknowledge that something is generated, but I will insist that the product is not art. It simply cannot be by definition, and probably also by law. Now, I've realized that one of the strongest arguments in favor of AI-generated imagery being art is the following. Human input in the form of a prompt is still required. The prompt's modifications and curations by humans mean there is still creative decision-making involved. And I'll bring this up in my next set of arguments, which are the arguments that AI-generated imagery is not art. So I'll take the final point from above, or the final point that I just mentioned, and I'll consider it to in fact be a major pitfall to the arguments that AI-generated imagery is art. Human input is still required. The prompts, modifications, and curations by humans mean there is still creative decision-making involved. Now let's consider the commissioned art analogy. A. The commissioned art analogy. If a human artist is commissioned, they bring their own skill, interpretation, and creativity to the commissioned piece. In many instances, the commissioner may have directed the work. In the case of an image produced via an image generator, AI does not interpret one's vision in a creative, emotional, or intentional sense. AI does not interpret the image data like a human does. AI mathematically generates imagery based on patterns identified during training. If you consider my arguments made a few paragraphs above covering the artistic tools analogy and apply that to the commissioned art analogy, the AI is the commissioned. The human prompter is the commissioner, not the artist. AI is not human, and it cannot be the artist. I'd also like to point out that I've put reference literature, everything that helped me put this together. I'll link those in my blog, and I'll link the blog in the video description, and I might also link all the references that I've used for this in the description as well if you find yourself interested to read this further. B. Intention and inspiration. To expand on inputting data, even with one's best intention to produce an AI-generated image that's one's art, I'd be interested to know what proportion of generated final output fits exactly what the prompter envisioned. My guess would be that a significant amount of final output might not even be what the prompter initially intended. Yet, if the prompter ends up liking the generated image, the prompter can choose to present it as their own. I consider this to be disingenuous. Where is the line that distinguishes intent and accident by incorrect model prediction? This undefined space between original intent and accidental output drives me to argue that the artistic intentionality component of an AI-generated image is void. AI does not intend to express anything. AI generates images based on probability and learned patterns. To expand on this, a human can be inspired by existing work, even if the human uses this inspiration and visual reference to prompt the production of an AI-generated image. Even if a prompter goes into a project having an understanding of what their own intentions are as an artist, the prompter cannot know exactly what original works and to what extent various original works were used for the machine training, and therefore in the generation of the final image. A prompter could end up with an image that was synthesized using information from various works of art that were originally created with an intention completely not understood by the algorithm and in no way related to the prompter's intent. When an artist is inspired by another piece of art to the point that they want to create a piece of art that stems from that inspiration drives at least part of the intention of the final piece. AI-generated imagery draws from millions or even billions of data sets. How can one even begin to understand the intentions behind every artwork that trained the generative model? And this question alone is far-fetched, as it suggests that the AI model even had intention to begin with. A lot of the points made in favor of this being art are fundamentally derived from nonsense, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. The insinuation that there is artistic intention within an algorithm is not rooted in reality. See? Ethics, originality, derivation, and theft. AI models, though trained on human-made artwork to remix existing styles, do not create images from own lived experiences. There is no personal expression, and with that, no originality. With no originality, one must raise ethical concerns. I do not know what proportion of publicly available image generators are trained on datasets derived from copyrighted or stolen works scraped from the internet without consent, but I suspect it's most of them. And please don't quote me on that one because I don't actually know. Bluntly put, AI-generated imagery is not original, but derivative at best and theft at worst. And for this reason, as far as I know, AI-generated work is not easily copyrightable, and I'm not going to insert any references for that quote because it's based on jurisdiction, so you can look that up. There's thousands and thousands of articles that cover this, so you can look one up that covers your jurisdiction more appropriately. Conclusion. Whether AI-generated imagery is art depends on your definition of art. If art is about human expression, then AI-generated imagery doesn't make the cut. But if art is defined by the final aesthetic result and emotional impact, then AI images can be considered artistic works. I dislike being so reliant on the semantics, but we might be at a point where the semantics are needed and a definition for this new realm of imagery is required. Either this or the core definition of art needs to be contested and amended. I've walked through my adult life shifting my perspective on what art is based solely on my mood. If I'm in a decent energy state, then yes, I can see art and feel the intention behind it. If I'm in a low energy state, which is my general state, then I couldn't care less. A picture is a picture, a photo is a photo, and I will feel nothing for any of it. Not even my own work. I roll my eyes at myself when I refer to some of my photography as art. So if I can feel such indifference to a piece that fits the definition of art, then what's the harm in labeling as a soulless machine-produced piece as art? At the very least, AI-generated imagery occupies a new space, a space that challenges traditional notions of creativity, intentions, and originality. AI and AI-generated visuals are here to stay. It is now time to encourage critical thinking as observers of and users of AI. We need to equip ourselves to better understand the basics of AI and to learn how to distinguish between what makes up the AI component and where the human component lies, what role each one plays, and to which degree. I have at no point felt intimidated by the idea of AI taking my artistic integrity and taking away a commission from me. I am somewhat indifferent to the idea of AI infiltrating the art space because in due time we will be so bombarded with the sterility being produced that humans will be craving authentic human work, genuine human expression, and meaningful human conversation and experience. The question is not how to avoid it. It is how do we navigate through and benefit from AI as humans while staying true to our humanity. And I ask this today particularly in the context of art, artistic productivity, the creative process, and artistic integrity. The outcomes of my research have also called to question my feelings towards my own photography that I present as art. Perhaps photography, like other forms of imagery, is something other than art, but just as important. And I'd like to thank one of my poll participants for opening my perspective to this question. If I can leave you with anything, let it be this. You do you. It's your life. Do what you want. But I do suggest that you give it some thought. I don't think that this will be settled anytime soon, even with a clear definition for art that already exists. AI has resulted in fascinating technology with implications that most of us can neither predict nor understand. AI-generated images are part of the landscape and they will remain part of the picture, so to speak. There are many people using this technology and producing images that have them feeling satisfaction and fulfillment. And who am I to presume to be in any position to take that away from anybody? But I will repeat myself. I strongly recommend that you give some thought to how you present your product and what you claim it to be. Whether it's AI generated, AI assisted, traditional, or purist, if it makes you come alive, keep doing it, because the world needs more people that feel that way. I get the feeling that was a very long one, so thank you so much for taking the time to be here, folks. If you're here till the end, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you took something from it. If you're interested in my take on artistic intention in your photography, check out the video you see on the screen. It's also linked in the description below. Cheers.